Book of First Samuel is a very significant book because it tells us about a turning point in Israel's history. Now, in order to understand this and what's going on, we have to kind of think about the context. So what's happened is God's people have gone into the land that was promised to them, but they didn't fully possess it. They didn't quite fully, conquer. And so after a couple of generations, they're not communicating what God had done for them. They're not talking about, the law of God and what God had required of them. Every man began to do what was right in their own eyes. And so God had to chasten his people, which he does, in love. And he allowed them to be oppressed for a period of time, made them yearn for him, and they would cry out for salvation. God would send them a judge to drive out the enemies of God's people. And so there was this back and forth of, on fire for God, not so. On fire for God, not so. And so they were going back and forth and back and forth. Anyway, so that's kind of the dynamic of the book of Judges, and the book of Ruth happens during the book of Judges. So then we go to First Samuel, and this is chronologically speaking after these things. So Samuel is accounted for usually, a lot of times, as the last judge. And Samuel was a very significant person because he wasn't a Levite, he wasn't a priest. Priests were sons of Aaron. Levites were, more generally speaking, descendants of Levi. And so he wasn't either of those things, but when he was born, his mother dedicated him to the Lord. And so when he got to a certain age, she literally just dropped him off at the tabernacle and said, here he is. Use him however you want to. So because he wasn't a Levite, because he wasn't a priest, there were a lot of things he couldn't do. But the priest at the time, the high priest at the time, Eli, he was an old man, and his sons were very wicked and very selfish, and they had no regard for God's law. And there was a light that was always supposed to be burning in the tabernacle, and Eli let that light go out. And when the light went out, God then spoke to Samuel and began to work with him and call him, and later on Samuel becomes a prophet of the Lord, and God uses him mightily. But what happens here is God, for a period of time, turns his back on the priesthood, and he turns his back on the conventional, institutions that he had set up, because the people just weren't paying attention to it. And he had even allowed for a period of time the Ark of the Testimony, or the Ark of the Covenant, to be taken into captivity by the hands of the enemies. And so what sin does, if we allow sin to just kind of callous our hearts after a period of time, God will get to the point where he will abandon an established order, and he will turn his back on his people for a period of time. And that's our takeaway for today.